5 years had passed since I last saw Ethan, my husband, the man I had once believed to be my soulmate. But now, I found myself face to face with him after the devastation I had caused. It had been 5 long, painful years since he uncovered my betrayal, discovering me in the arms of another man, Michael, my boss. That night shattered not only our marriage, but the life we had so carefully built over a decade. I often replayed that moment in my mind. Ethan, standing in shock, his trembling hands clutching the takeout bag he'd brought for me. His eyes, once full of love, seemed to lose their light when he saw Michael and me in that compromising position.
He didn't yell.
He didn't even shout. He simply stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger, before turning around and walking away without a word. The divorce came swiftly. Ethan refused to speak to me during the process, and I couldn't blame him. I signed the papers with tears streaming down my face, knowing I had no right to ask for anything. Not our home, not our memories, not even him. Once everything was finalized, I left town. I couldn't bear the weight of my own mistakes or the judgment of our friends. For the next few years, I focused on rebuilding myself. Therapy became my sanctuary, a place where I could examine the cracks in my marriage and confront the parts of myself that led me to cheat. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the loneliness, the fear of never being enough, and the desperate need for validation that I sought from Michael. I had destroyed the most meaningful part of my life, and no amount of reflection could ever undo that. The guilt consumed me every day. But what hurt the most wasn't the affair itself. It was the realization of just how deeply Ethan had loved me. He had been patient, kind, and supportive. He had always been there for me, my rock. Yet I betrayed him. I turned my back on everything we had fought for and built together. Michael was nothing but a fleeting escape, a temporary fix to my insecurities. But the cost of that escape? The loss of the love of my life. Then one day, I received a wedding invitation. At first, I didn't want to open it. It was from Sarah, one of Ethan's close friends who had always been kind to me. Seeing her name flooded me with memories, dinners, vacations, laughter. It felt like a lifetime ago. I hesitated before opening the envelope, and when I saw the venue, my heart sank. The wedding was to be held at the same church where Ethan and I had exchanged our vows. Part of me wanted to rip the invitation up, throw it away, but another part of me, the part that longed for closure, felt an undeniable pull to attend. I never had the chance to apologize to Ethan, to say goodbye. And now, here was my chance. I knew attending the wedding could either bring me closer to healing or be another painful reminder of my mistakes. Despite the uncertainty, I decided to go. The day of the wedding, I felt like a ghost, walking through the corridors of my past. The church looked the same as it had on our wedding day, the stained glass windows, the soft glow of candles, the faint scent of roses. Every corner seemed to echo with fragments of memories of Ethan. I scanned the crowd, torn between hoping and fearing that he might be there. Then I saw him.
Ethan.
He sat near the front, effortlessly handsome in a dark suit. His hair had a touch of gray, but his posture was just as confident as I remembered. He was talking to a woman with striking red hair who laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. My stomach twisted with jealousy and regret. She was stunning, elegant, poised, everything I felt I wasn't. A wave of bitterness and self-loathing washed over me. Was she the one who had taken my place in his heart? Did she bring him happiness in a way I never could? I tried to slip into a pew unnoticed, but as I moved, Ethan's gaze caught mine. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not warm, just quiet recognition. I wanted to apologize, to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't deserve his forgiveness. Not after what I had done. So, I lowered my head and focused on the ceremony, grappling with the weight of my emotions. When the vows were exchanged and the reception began, I lingered near the exit, debating whether to leave before the emotions became too overwhelming. But fate had other plans. Clara. I froze. My heart raced as I turned to face him. There he was, standing just a few feet away, looking like the man I once loved. The ache in my chest was almost unbearable. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling, revealing the storm of emotions inside me. Up close, Ethan looked even more striking than I remembered. There was a quiet maturity about him now, a calmness that I envied. He wasn't the man I had left behind. There was strength in him now, a quiet resilience. He had endured and moved on, while I had been trapped in my regret. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone polite but distant, as though we were strangers, not two people who had once shared years of love and trust. "Neither did I admitted. "I wasn't sure it was a good idea to come. To be honest." "I see," he replied, nodding slightly. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "So, you're doing well?" I asked, struggling to keep my composure. "I'm doing better," he said. "Therapy's helped. I'm trying to make sense of everything." The words felt hollow, like an apology I couldn't fully express. "I'm glad to hear that," I whispered, trying to force a smile, but my heart was heavy.
I'm so sorry, Ethan. For everything.
I was selfish, and I destroyed us. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know how truly sorry I am. I ruined the best thing I ever had. Ethan studied me for a long moment. His expression softened just a bit. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Clara," he said honestly. "But I've made peace with what happened. I had to. It took time, lots of time. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt, but it's in the past now. I've moved on." His gaze shifted to the woman with the red hair, who was now laughing with someone near the dance floor. "I've found peace," he added. A pang of jealousy rose within me, but I quickly pushed it aside. I had no right to feel that way anymore. "I never stopped loving you," I admitted softly. "I just wasn't the person you deserved." Ethan's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I once knew. But then, it faded, replaced by something else, something I couldn't name, but recognized as closure. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara," he said gently but firmly. "You deserve that. But it won't be with me." I nodded. The weight of his words settled over me. He was right. I had lost him, and no amount of regret would change that. As I stood there, facing the man I once loved so deeply, I realized something important. I couldn't undo the past. I couldn't erase the mistakes I'd made or revive the love we had lost. But I could learn from it. I could strive to be a better person, someone who no longer sought validation from others. Someone strong enough to stand on her own 2 feet and move forward, without the constant shadow of guilt. With that thought, I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind. It was time. Time to start over. It had been a long time, but as Ethan spoke softly, breaking the silence, I could barely comprehend the weight of the moment. "It has," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. The years had passed, yet standing there, it felt as if no time had passed at all. We stood in the dim light, 2 people who had once shared everything, now facing each other as strangers. Between us, memories lingered, heavy, unspoken. An awkward pause hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as the weight of our shared history loomed over us. I didn't know how to begin, what to say. The years had changed us, but the past still clung to us like a shadow that refused to let go. "Do you want to talk?" Ethan asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I wasn't expecting the question. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice trembling. I had longed for this moment in a twisted way, but now that it was here, I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. We stepped outside, away from the noise of the reception. The evening air was cool, and I wrapped my arms around myself, searching for some comfort. For a moment, we stood in silence, the muffled sounds of the party fading into the distance. It felt like we were on the edge of something deep and painful, neither of us ready to take the first step. "I heard you left town," Ethan said, his voice breaking the stillness. "I did," I replied, taking a deep breath. The crisp night air made my skin tingle. I couldn't stay. Everything reminded me of what I'd done. It was like living in a house full of ghosts, each one more painful than the last. Ethan's eyes softened, though his expression remained unreadable. "And Michael?" he asked, steady as though bracing himself for my answer. It ended shortly after. I said, my words heavy. "Everything," I confessed. The words, they were hard to say. It was never real, Ethan. It was a mistake. A horrible, selfish mistake. I thought it would fill the emptiness I felt, but it only made everything worse. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, anger, pain, or maybe both, in his eyes. He didn't speak immediately, and the weight of the truth settled between us. I thought he might walk away, unable to bear hearing it, but instead, he spoke again. "I spent years trying to figure out what I did wrong," he said, his voice low. "I kept asking myself if I wasn't enough for you, if there was something I could have done differently. I thought maybe I missed something. Maybe I was the one who failed." Tears filled my eyes, and I struggled to hold them back as I listened to his words. "Was it you, Ethan?" I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It was me. I was scared, insecure, and I let my fears destroy everything. You were more than enough. I was just too blind to see it." He looked at me for a long moment. His gaze was intense, a mixture of sadness and something else, perhaps acceptance, but it was hard to read him now. Yet it was clear that he had moved on. "I've moved on, Clara," he said at last, his tone calm, but there was finality in his words. "It wasn't easy, but I had to. You can't live in the past forever." I nodded, my chest aching at his words. I had always known he would move on, but hearing him say it aloud felt like a blow to my heart. Still, I managed a small smile. "I'm glad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You deserve to be happy, Ethan. You always did." He hesitated for a moment, his tone softening as he asked, "And you? Have you found peace?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say yes, to tell him that everything was fine, that I had figured it all out, but the truth was far from that. "I'm trying," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I've spent the last 5 years trying to understand myself, trying to forgive myself. It's a work in progress. I don't know if I'll ever fully find peace, but I'm learning to accept that maybe that's okay." We stood there, the silence stretching between us, as the world around us seemed to fade. The faint music from the reception hall felt distant and insignificant. All that mattered was the fragile thread of connection between us, stretched but not quite broken. "I'm glad we talked," Ethan said finally, his voice low and sincere. "I think I needed this more than I realized." "Me too," I whispered. It felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted, though I knew the journey wasn't over. "I'm so sorry for everything, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling. "I hope you know that. I hope you know how much I regret the way things ended." "I do," he replied with a small, knowing smile. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, just quiet understanding. "We've both been shaped by the past, but we no longer have to let it define us." "I hope you find happiness, Clara," he said gently, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve it. We both do." A lump formed in my throat at his words. For a moment, I wasn't sure I could speak, but somehow I managed to say what I needed to. "Thank you," I whispered. "I hope you find everything you've been searching for too." He gave me one last look, a mixture of fondness and something else, perhaps acceptance, before turning and walking back toward the reception. I watched him go, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. It was like a door closing, but not in the way I had imagined. For years, I had carried the weight of guilt and regret, convinced that I had destroyed everything beyond repair. But in that moment, standing in the cool night air, I realized something important. Healing didn't mean trying to undo the past. It meant moving forward. As I watched Ethan disappear into the warm glow of the reception hall, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could start moving forward too. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that I could still find a path to happiness.